time to clean my Glock 34, and I decided to show you guys a complete teardown because this thing is pretty dirty. So let's do a safety check. Nothing in the chamber, nothing in the mag well, and we are good to go, safe and ready to tear down. Let's start with a basic field strip. You're going to pull back a 1/4 inch and pull down on the slide stop and push forward, and that will expose our frame and our slide here with all of our parts in it. I'm going to do a basic cleaning. This is all you really need to do. Pull out your recoil spring assembly and your barrel and start cleaning. But today I'm going to be doing a detailed cleaning. You only need one tool, the Glock tool. This thing will do everything. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the rear slide plate here in order to get to everything that's in here. So the first thing you're going to do is, this is your firing pin right there. There's a little knob there. You're going to make sure it's pushed up, and you're going to stick your Glock tool underneath that little pin there, and you're going to push down. And what that's going to do is it's going to release the tension on the spring that holds that rear slide plate. So you push down, and while you're pushing down, you keep your thumb on it and push the rear slide plate back. Keep your thumb over there because it's all spring tension. You let go to expose the firing pin assembly. So now you can pull your firing pin assembly out, and also your extractor depressor plunger. Just pull it straight out. So next we want to remove the extractor. Extractor is right here. It's fairly easy to take out. You push down in the extractor plunger and it'll usually drop right out, but since my gun's pretty dirty, it's gunked up, so you push down, it releases tension, and you can pull it out. There's your extractor right there. Now, usually if you tap down on your slide, the extractor plunger will come out, but like I said, it's pretty dirty. Here's the extractor plunger with the extractor plunger spring. Notice how small that is. Do not lose that. You'll be in a world of hurt if you lose that. So that's the complete teardown of the slide, except of course the sights, and we're not going to take the sights out. So let's move on to the frame. Gotta love Gaston Glock. He made this thing so simple to take down. There's only 3 pins on the Gen 3 that we have to worry about taking out, and that is the locking block pin, the trigger housing pin, and the trigger pin. So what I like to do is, well, what I've learned is you're going to push from the left to the right, and you're going to start with the locking block pin. You're going to push it straight out, pull it out from the other side. Now you're going to move on to the trigger housing pin, starting from the left to the right. Now you're going to kind of have to keep your thumb on the slide stop lever here, because you're going to have to kind of manipulate it to get it through. You push it, there you go. Now once you got that out, you can go ahead and take out your slide stop lever. Easily comes out. And now you can take out your locking block. You just lift up on it and it pulls straight out. Now you're going to push out the trigger pin from left to right. Push it all the way out. And now you're going to be able to take out the whole trigger assembly. And there it is. And that's as far as I go. I don't take out the slide lock or the magazine catch unless I needed to replace them. Which goes with the same thing with the firing pin assembly. I only tear this down if there's something broken or I want to replace something. So what you're going to do with the firing pin is you're going to pull down on the firing pin spring to expose the 2 cups on the top. You pull down and the 2 cups come off. That's what holds the spring on. And now you could take your spring off and expose the firing pin. Now if your firing pin was broken, you need to replace it, or you want to replace the spring, that's the only really time you really want to remove that. So let's move on to the trigger. You don't really need to tear this down completely unless you're going to change some parts out. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull back and up to release the tension of the trigger spring. There's the trigger spring right there, and here is the trigger with the trigger bar. Now if you want to remove it to replace the spring, or you want to put a new trigger in, what you're going to do is you're going to manipulate the trigger bar off the spring. You don't want to yank on it because you don't want to mess with the integrity of the spring. So it comes right out right there, and that there exposes your trigger spring. Now I'm not going to take the trigger spring out of the trigger housing. There's no need for me to do that. It's a little tiny spring. It connects to the trigger housing with a little hole down there. If you can see that. But just keep in mind that if you are going to take it out, when you're holding it this way, it looks like you want to form an S with your spring so that you know you have it on right. So let's take out the connector now. There's a couple ways you can do it, but the best way is to take your Glock tool and push from the back of the housing. There's a little hole there and it'll pop right out. So now it's time for me to clean this puppy up and put it back together. So let me start with putting the trigger bar and trigger back into the trigger housing. Like I said, there's a little spring, and on top of your trigger bar is a little tiny hole, and that's where the top of that spring goes in. Like I said, you got to be kind of careful. You don't want to yank on this or stretch it because it's really vital to your whole trigger. So you're going to manipulate it back into that little hole there, and it goes right on, just like that. And now we're ready to put this thing back together. The first thing we're going to need to do though is put our connector back in. So let's put the connector in. Fairly simple. Slides in that slot there and pushes down. And now we're ready to connect the trigger back to the trigger housing. And you pull back on the spring and it slides right in that slot and you're ready to go. Okay, so let's reassemble the entire frame now. So we're going to take our trigger housing assembly and we're going to slide it into the back slot there, and the trigger goes in that and it snaps right back in. There it is. Now we're going to take our locking block, slide that back in, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the locking block pin in, and now we're going to go from the right side, right to left. Here's the locking block pin. You push it straight in, that locks the locking block. Now I like to make sure that these things are even on both sides. I use my Glock tool to make sure it's nice and even on both sides. As you can see, it's there and there. Now I like to put the top one in first because it makes it a lot easier to put the slide stop lever in. It goes in this little slot here underneath that locking block pin. You can put the slide stop lever in, slides right in there. As you can see, it moves around pretty freely. So now we're going to put the trigger housing pin in and go from right to left because it's going to go through the hole, through the trigger, and through the slide stop lever. So sometimes you have to move the slide stop lever in order to get it pushed through correctly. You hear a little snap. Now I'm going to use my Glock tool and you'll hear a little click, and that way I know it's even on both sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in the trigger pin as the last pin. Of course, making sure it's even on both sides. And there you have it. A completely reassembled, clean frame. Now we're ready to move on. Now the first thing we got to do is we got to put the firing pin assembly back together. We have our firing pin assembly, we got our two cups, and we have our firing pin spring. Now we're going to place it in the slide and use this as a tool. We're going to lift it up and turn it. Now I got a little better angle for you. It's going to be really hard to see, but you're going to start with the spring, and here's your cup right here. You're going to have one, and you're going to pull down on the spring, and you're going to put one cup in, and don't let go. Trust me, this thing will shoot off like a rocket. Now you're going to pull down again and put the other half of the cup in, and make sure it's secure. And now you can let go. Your spring is secure. Your firing pin assembly is back together and ready to put back into the gun. Now it's time to reassemble the remaining parts to this slide. You're going to start with the firing pin safety and spring. Remember, it's a really tiny spring. Do not lose that. It's going to go inside that hole right there. You place it in with the spring first. Make sure the spring is in there correctly. It'll depress down. Now we're going to put the extractor in, and in order to do that you have to push down on the safety pin, and it will slide right in there, and the safety pin holds the extractor in. From that point now we can put our extractor depressor plunger in. Make sure the metal side goes in, metal side down with the spring on top. Now we can put our firing pin assembly in. Slides right in just like that. And now we're ready to put in the rear slide plate. So here is our rear slide plate. and it's basically a slide. It slides into the back end right there, and we're going to have to do some depressing of a couple parts in order to get it. Let me show you what you have to do. You're going to have to take your Glock tool and you're going to have to push down on the spacer sleeve right there, which is spring loaded, so be very careful. Now, as you're pushing down, you're going to slide the plate over the spacer sleeve. And now you can kind of let go because it's not going to go anywhere. Now you continue, you're going to press down on the extractor depressor plunger and continue to push the slide plate over, and it snaps into place. And that's it. We're all put back together. The slide is completely reassembled. Next thing we do is we're going to oil up our gun and put it back together. So the gun is now completely reassembled and cleaned. I'm a proponent of the 1, 2, 3 step. 1 drop of oil right here, which goes to the connector. Now we put 2 drops of oil on the barrel, 1 here and 1 here, and spread it throughout the barrel. And our 3 drops of oil are going to go 1 on each side of the slide and 1 right here. Not much oil is needed on Glocks, just enough to keep them lubricated and running. Let's finish the assembly. Let's put the barrel back in. We're going to put the recoil spring assembly back in, like so. Snap. And now we're going to put the slide back on the frame. Make sure you stay within the rails there. There you go. Give it a couple slides to get the oil down there. Pull the trigger. Now we test the reset. And we're good to go. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment.